Hi, and welcome back to Before We Burn Out. So, today we're talking about leadership. And I don't think I'm alone when I say that I think I've lost count of the number of times that I've been asked to show leadership as if it's like the same skill as throwing a dart at a bullseye or doing a pull up. And I think what makes it harder for sustainability people to show leadership often comes down to the fact that we're not in control of budgets, P&Ls, resources, and we're often operating from a position of relatively little real power and relatively
Mm,
minimal support. And so I think that can feel quite exhausting to find yourself in that position, whether you're senior or junior or at the start of your career or in the middle of your career.
yeah, for sure. I hear it all the time. I think it's a real experience there. We usually picture leadership we associate it with job titles and a sense of authority and just being in charge. But my hope that in the future this is something we evolve out of because I see how it burns people out. It leaves others thinking that they don't qualify if they don't have those titles or sense of authority. And today, what I thought we could do is share 5 principles for what I'm calling Leadership 2.0. And Nita, you can bring in your perspective, what it's actually like to operate inside these systems. Maybe talk about those moments of possibilities for leadership and alongside the frustrations. And I will offer ways we can reimagine and practice leadership differently so we can explore what maybe could be a healthier, more human form of leadership.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so my first principle one is that everyone can lead. So just to put it plainly and simply, it's not about title. It's about choices. It's about behavior. So influence isn't only happening at the top of a hierarchy. It can also be generated through everyday moments as well.
Yeah, I think all of us can relate to that. I mean, we've all got our work memories. So I'll just share one of mine, which is when I had my first sustainability role. I was an environmental manager at Barclays. So I was barely off the graduate program. I think I'd been in the company for about 18 months. And so certainly had no control over budgets, the wider sustainability strategy. But it did kind of give me the best grounding in how to influence people because my entire job was persuading senior executives, pushing my ideas forward, knowing I was operating with no authority. And that can feel a lot like pushing water uphill. And particularly when
Mm,
you're young, I think you have maybe, or perhaps this is just me, just having a bit more energy and a bit more enthusiasm. But I think looking back on it, it was quite draining too. And especially
yeah.
if you're doing that kind of work without recognition. I was lucky. I had a great boss. Andy is still one of my favorite bosses I've ever had.
Mm,
And I think as a result, my proudest moments were the actually the quieter ones, where as a young brown female in quite a white male dominated environment, just sort of quietly standing my ground in a meeting and building trust sort of behind the scenes so that I would get listened to in those meetings.
mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I can definitely feel the weight of that sense of maybe we call it like invisible leadership. So in the moment, in the experience, feels like you're carrying a lot of responsibility, but it doesn't get noticed or appreciated or rewarded in the same way because it happens in these, like you said, like quieter moments that we can be proud of, but they are draining, can lead us to question our value a little bit where the system isn't really set up for these kinds of moments, this style of leadership. And so I think part of leadership 2.0 is about recognizing those quiet moments, those quiet choices that are leadership. So that for ourselves, we don't dismiss our contributions. We manage to value the impact that we are having, even if other people don't always see it. But then it is also about making other people aware of the contributions that we're making. And so I have a couple of practices for this that hopefully can support people around this. One is something we can do for ourselves. So just making a list, making a note of these moments of quiet leadership, anything from a conversation that you help steer in a particular direction or a decision that you influence, and just keep a log of it and just keep checking in with it. It's just a little reminder of the good work that you do. And that's a nice little thing for us. But then also, let's not just keep it to ourselves. Let's bring those examples into maybe a quarterly review or a team catch up. It's not about bragging. It's about being honest about your contribution and just sharing them as evidence of influence that you've had, of leadership opportunities or moments that you've had. And it helps your manager and your team see the value of your work, which otherwise might go unnoticed and be invisible.
That's such a nice way of looking at it. And I think because we just started this principle with a memory from the very start of my career, I'm reminded of probably something that I very rarely talk about, but I must have been 26 or 27 as the environmental manager at Barclays. And, through some really successful negotiating, I was able to secure over £1 million worth of funding for this tiny solar charity. So this was outside of the massive community investment program and the foundation and all of that kind of stuff. It was just like very specifically for this charity. And he had two guys working out of a Quaker office in Old Street in London, and it was to pilot their social enterprise idea. I'd sort of slightly forgotten about it, so thank you for reminding me, Sol, because
Mm,
actually I saw a post from one of those co-founders who remains the CEO. That pilot is now a fully established social enterprise called Sunny Money, and it's providing renewable solar energy across several territories in East Africa. And I think they just announced earlier this week that they can say that 100% of this territory in Malawi is now fully solar. So that little thing that
mm,
I did when I was really young has like snowballed butterfly effect into that. And you forget, don't you? You forget that actually you had a role to play in doing something like that. So thank you for reminding me.
mm.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really easy to forget. And what a wonderful name, Sunny Money. I like that.
Great, isn't it?
Okay, so principle two.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So principle two for me around leadership is that you can't lead others if you can't lead yourself. So how you are shapes how you show up. So if you're constantly feeling stretched or on edge or driven by this need to constantly prove yourself, that spills out into how you lead. And so I guess what I'm promoting here is that if we're steadier in who we are as a person, then people feel that too. And that leadership becomes a little bit stronger.
Yeah, we've talked about this in a couple of episodes, but I think it took me a very long time to realize I needed to put my oxygen mask on first if I was to be a good colleague, let alone a good leader. And I would say, particularly in the last 15 years, my career has been spent working inside agencies and for consultancies where there are often demanding clients, there's internal revenue targets that you've got to hit, you've got competing deadlines. And whether this is the people pleaser in me, but my instinct was always just to say yes. The more I took on, the more I was proving that I'm valuable to this organization. And I guess I thought saying yes to everything made me look competent, capable, hyper efficient. The reality is, looking back on that, is A, I was exhausted and in a perpetual cycle of burning out. And then B, it wasn't actually setting a great example for my colleagues or my teams. Because if I look back over old feedback, which I've had to do over the last few months, it constantly refers to me being overbooked and overscheduled and my team
Mhm.
feeling worried for me, but also maybe feeling like they can't ask for the support that they need. So actually taking a breath and demonstrating some of these good values mean that your team does actually see you as the leader that they need you to be.
Yeah. It's a brutal contradiction really, how it seems like the way to get noticed and rewarded in the system is the appearance of being endlessly busy. But I do see that those who can kind of command respect as leaders are those who can be clearest and most steady. And so it's a funny thing, but again, I have a couple of practices around this to help people find that steady base. One is something we've talked about before. I talk all the time about slowing down and just pausing. And so you mentioned the people pleaser there and taking on things and saying yes a lot of the time. So maybe next time that you're asked to take something on, just pause, take a breath, and just ask yourself a question along the lines of, am I choosing this? Like, am I truly choosing this? Or am I trying to prove myself? What's the motivation behind it? What's the energy behind where I'm coming from? And even if you still end up saying yes, that is totally fine. That's great. But it comes from a conscious choice, not just an automatic reaction driven by that sense of needing to please others. So it feels a little bit more like you have freedom to choose. And as another form of practical application, if we imagine we're in a meeting. This can be really powerful in meetings. If someone asks for volunteers, maybe just don't jump in straight away as a volunteer. Take a moment, weigh it up and then decide. It models a sense of like discernment to your colleague and sets a tone that like not every request deserves an instant yes. And if someone is expecting an instant answer, then I do encourage people to keep experimenting with a phrase that I love, which is just, can I get back to you? I'll get back to you. If you're not sure, many times you would be surprised by how often it is acceptable to just get back to someone. And if you don't feel like that's an option and you end up overcommitting, there is an opportunity to use that pause afterwards as well and find the language to then clearly state where you're at, what you are willing to do, and what you're not. You can do it at any point before, during, or after.
I think it's such an interesting thing when you think about the energy exchange. I was just thinking about visualizing myself in some of those meetings.
Mm,
And I'm someone who has to create space in, if we take the year, I'm someone who can be all in, running a million miles an hour, and I'm fully focused on you. But as a result of that hyper focus, I need periods of time that's downtime. That is
yeah.
what I call kind of my creative reset, my recharge. And I don't think our culture really celebrates taking that time. I think it makes me a better person and makes me a much more rounded person. I know that other people's energy, like if you take my partner, he's slow and steady and can give 5 days a week, 50 weeks of the year. And that's fine. That's why business works, because it takes two different kinds of people. But I love the idea, Sol, of when you're feeling like your back is up against a wall, of just taking that breath and that pause to say, is this the right thing for me at this time? So yeah,
Mm,
thank you again.
yeah, really nice. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Principle 3. This is about building a resilient and agile mindset. So the principle is that leadership today needs a new kind of resilience. It is not the grit your teeth kind. It's about learning to navigate the self-doubt and the people pleasing that we just mentioned, or whether it shows up as procrastination or whether it's perfectionism. But this is the stuff that quietly drains us. And so the resilience is understanding and learning about how that impacts us and learning to navigate it rather than just try to charge on through it and ignore it or suppress that.
I'm smiling slightly because otherwise I would probably cry. I know that cycle so well. I sort of refer to myself now as a recovering perfectionist, because I have definitely been that person that has worked through the night, editing reports, writing briefs so that other people's lives would be easier. And as I just said, that perfectionism cost me so much energy because it's cumulative. There's only so many nights that you can do that. There's only so many weeks that you can behave like that. And when the adrenaline stops, you crash slash I crash. And just over time, you're just not as sharp. You're underslept, or I would be underslept. I'd be cranky. I'd be short with people.
Mm,
So yeah, in a bid to be perfect, I'd actually really tripped myself up.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I really hear that. I think perfectionism feels productive, right? In the moment, feels necessary, feels protective as well because it's meeting one of our needs to be seen in a particular way. But yeah, it chips away at our energy and eventually our confidence as well. And for me, a question that I often like to ask myself, or the way in which I like to think about this, is before submitting a piece of work. I mean, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a big project, just an email or a draft or a proposal. Use the line of, here's my solid first draft. It covers the essentials. I'd welcome some feedback. A lot of the time we're not having to produce something that's like a final perfect edit. So just we can ask ourselves this question of, if I'm feeling stuck, like, is this good enough? Yeah, super simple. Is this good enough? And just trying to get clear. If we go into any piece of work having a sense of what good enough feels like and looks like, then when we get to that level, when we start to approach that, we have a sense of that and we can hit the send button a little bit more easily. So it's about both communicating with people you're sharing your work with, whether it's a work in progress, simply saying that out loud, hey, this is a work in progress, maybe takes that sense of perfectionism, that feeling of it having to be perfect away a little bit, the pressure's off, and then having a real sense of like, well, what does good enough look like? And then as you start to approach that, you notice it and you're able to share it more. a little bit earlier as well.
I really love that because I think now I'm the biggest advocate for progress over perfection. This
Mm,
podcast being one of those examples of progress over perfection. And often I say to my clients, there's this triangle of what you can have. And it's like, do you want something fast? Do you want something cheap? Or do you want something good quality? Because something has to give. And I
mm,
love that idea of when you write that email to say, I've done this quickly, so therefore the quality isn't that great. Or this is going to take me a little bit more time, but it's going to cost you because I'm going to need to get some more people in to help me. And I think that's such a nice way of sort of framing things to go, you can't just have everything that you want at the drop of a hat. There is a cost of time, quality, or just human resources. I'd like to think I still have really high standards of work, but I definitely support pitching that thing before it's polished, getting that idea out into the world and testing it before you're ready. Because, you know, you also don't want to block yourself because actually, the quicker your idea gets out there, the quicker you're going to get feedback and the quicker you learn. And I think
mm,
I'm just looking at my bookshelf and The Lean Startup by Eric Ries is a really
mm.
good example of don't procrastinate over your own job. Just get it out there. And if it's not a business that's worth doing, then cut it. Otherwise, you'll just spend a year
Mm,
procrastinating about this thing that isn't even a real thing. People value, I think, honesty and reality rather than the perfect piece of work. Because let's face it, who's got time to read it anyway? Who's reading the details? And if you have
yeah.
that open relationship, you're building that trust. I hope that helps someone else out there actually earlier in their career.
And just to say off the back of that, you know, the perfect piece of work doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I think there's a fear that people have is that if they're not a perfectionist, the quality of their work suffers. Whereas I would argue perfectionism reduces the quality of the work. There is the point at which you've done a good job. And by continuing to work on it and getting into the real nitty gritty and trying to manipulate and move everything around, we actually end up compromising the quality of it. So for me, stepping back from perfectionism does not mean we're reducing the quality of our work. It just means we're saving energy and submitting something that's really as good as it can be, usually.
And I think it feeds quite nicely into this next principle, principle 4.
100%. Principle 4, performance and well-being rise and fall together. They are not opposites. They're inseparable.
I'm in a period of trying to find some new contracts. And when I'm looking at company websites, there's always invariably a version of this on a careers page or on an about us page, which is while people are our most important asset, we really value culture, we really, you know, want to support your well-being. Yet, and I have worked in lots of organizations, I've come across very few that actually really prioritize that as an integral
Mm,
part of the way in which they work. So, yeah, I mean, I hold my hands up. Like, I've been guilty of pushing myself too far, watching others push themselves to the point of sacrificing their health and their relationships for pieces of work. And I'd like to say we are consultants. I am a consultant. We are not brain surgeons. So, the work, no matter how important it might seem to the agency, is not life saving. It doesn't really matter. And targets that are not my individual responsibility, they are a collective responsibility. And so as a result of like taking all that responsibility on, the irony is that we become worse leaders because we become short-tempered and less creative and less innovative and just tired, just tired. And so the very thing that we end up sacrificing is the performance, which is the thing that we had thought all these sacrifices were worth.
yeah. I feel this list has become a list of painful ironies in that we are. So for this one, we're told the harder we push, the more effective we are. But often, just like we learn with perfectionism, there's a point at which pushing harder makes you less effective. It's not sustainable and it actively undermines our performance and our leadership. And so it really is acknowledging that the well-being fuels performance and performance fuels well-being as well, I should say. But yes, indeed, well-being at the office, yeah, shouldn't be tokenistic. It should go beyond an occasional trip to a yoga class. It can be found in and scattered throughout the day in little moments to reset and recharge. And so again, another question that we can ask ourselves before we keep going, when we notice ourselves maybe getting to that point of slight burnout, asking ourselves like, am I right now? Am I feeling depleted, or am I feeling quite well resourced? Just an energy check-in. And if you're depleted, do something about it. Do the thing that you know that will give you a 2-minute reset. Stretch, a breathe, a stand up, go grab a glass of water, go have a chat with someone. whatever it might be. And then if you're feeling a little bit more better resourced, dive back into it. But also we can do this with others as well, which is really cool. We can do it in teams, in team meetings. At the start of a long meeting, I really work with clients to ask them to do a 1 minute reset together or midway through as well, as we start to notice the energy starts to wane. If the energy is waning, we know we need to do something about it, because so much of like how well we can lead and think through things comes from the energy we show up with. So take a short pause, gather the energy in the room, reset, and then continue as a team and build that into your ritual as a routine. It's a really nice connecting thing as well.
I really like that you've given some advice there for just individuals who maybe our listeners are currently in jobs where it might not have the best work life balance or the best well-being culture. These interventions are such a helpful way to just protect whatever is left inside your own reservoir. And you look, we will all find ourselves in those organizations at any point in our career. And for me, it's becoming increasingly important to find an organization that either has good programs in place. And by good programs, I was listening to a female founder led business called Her First 100K. And the founder gives her whole staff a paid week off every quarter to recharge. This is on top of their holiday pay for exactly what you're talking about in this principle. She says she needs a brilliant team around her for the other 45 weeks of the year. So she's like, why wouldn't I let everyone just have a reset for 1 week in a quarter so I get the best 11 weeks out of them? And I'm here for it. And for me, if I can find those dream roles, amazing. If not, I'm actively now looking at those organizations that are adopting the 4-day work week as standard. There's been over 250 companies that have been piloted in the UK, and almost none of them have decided to return to a 5-day week. So
Um,
those are the organizations that I think more and more of us are going to start seeking out,
yeah.
because it's such a priority in this fast-paced world to
Mm.
conserve the energy that we have.
Yeah, beautiful. Love that. Cool. All right, let's keep on rolling. Number 5, insight isn't enough. So when we're looking at building our leadership skills, our communication skills, recognizing that we don't change, we don't develop just because we understand something. We change because we practice it. So our mind is like a muscle that only strengthens if you train it. That's number 5.
This makes me feel really ashamed. um God, I'm a real consumer of any kind of book or podcast where it's telling me I can have a life hack or a business hack or, advice in some way to tax whatever my output is. And in the moment when I'm listening to it, I'd feel inspired. I'd be like, yes, absolutely. I need to be drinking lemon water at 4 a.m. in the morning and doing an hour of meditation, all of those things. And yeah, sure, fine. I may have done it for a few weeks, but the reality is I am who I am. And all that's happened is that I feel slightly bad about the fact that I now know what I'm doing, whereas previously I was somewhat oblivious to my original problem. And I think I have to accept that it's a bit like a fad diet. Ultimately, the theory to lose weight is consume fewer calories from unprocessed food and move more.
So that's so true, keeping it simple. But it's so tempting because, like, both of us, we love learning new things. We love growth. We love being inspired by new ideas. But the thing that moves the needle is implementation and integration. Like, it's not a personal failing if the inspiration and the motivation that we get from books and podcasts fades over a period of time and it doesn't ultimately change things for us in a sustainable, ongoing way. That's just kind of how our brain works. We have a spark of insight that only lasts if it's reinforced through practice. So for me, the trick that I work with people on all the time is building these small little mental muscle reps into our daily lives, just like we talked about before, right? So go back to that podcast, go back to that book. And if there was something in there that genuinely felt helpful, maybe instead of picking up another book or starting the next podcast, using that time to just think about how you could implement or integrate that advice into your day as a regular habit and start putting it into action. And you can just experiment with it. If it doesn't ultimately lead to something that you find fulfilling or helpful, then fine. try something else. But we do need to remember, keep on coming back to the implementation rather than just learning and learning and learning more without integrating it into your life.
Oh, you're so right. I am such a learning junkie and I
Yeah,
am
me too.
very much a magpie for the latest new thing. But funnily enough, I had just started revisiting some of these books and podcasts that I've listened to, saved, and thought, oh, yeah, I'll listen to that when I'm sat at a desk so I can make notes because often I listen to podcasts when I'm on the move. So, yes, at the grand old age of 44, I think I have finally realized it's perhaps not about needing to know more in this current period of time, but making space to embed how
Mm,
I use those tools. So, thank you. These are really good. I really liked this session. It's a little bit different for us.
yeah,
But just to recap then, so those 5 principles, if I've got this right, are everyone can lead, lead yourself first, build resilience and agility, and then treat performance and well-being as inseparable. And insight creates change when it's implemented.
nice.
I really appreciate that you've not come to the table with these as abstract concepts. I think you could have written a very academic script around what these could be, but you've actually given us some really practical, applicable things that we can start doing right here, right now in our daily life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's part of it, right? It's practice. The more that we can practice this way of leading, the more we can show up fully in our lives, at our work, and then also it's the way in which we can shift culture, right? So this leadership 2.0, mental fitness leadership isn't about waiting for permission. It's about showing up in these really small human ways every day, consistently and sustainably, for sure.
Nice. Okay, dear listener, we'd love to hear from you. So, which of these principles speaks to you most right now? And what's that one small thing that you're going to practice this week? Drop us a
Mm.
note through all the standard channels. We're on LinkedIn, and that's where we'd like to hear from you the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts on YouTube, and come find us on our LinkedIn pages. We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts, your stories, and your moments of just like despair or hope or anything you've managed to implement or learn from these conversations.
Thanks for listening. Keep going gently, and we'll see you next time before we burn out.